So hello and welcome to this final webinar in this series. This is actually webinar number 5, and over the last 4 weeks we've taken a topic. So we've covered lethargy, then we talked about stress, partly because it was International Stress Week, and then we talked about boundaries, and last week we talked about positivity. And this week we're going to put it all together. But first of all, a quick reminder as to why the three of us are working together in this way. So my background is the martial arts, and I'm very much interested in mindset. So I'm all about things like confidence, self-esteem and self-worth. We then have Helen, who as a hypnotherapist is looking at specific issues like stress, worry, fear, anxiety, and that's been very common over the last several months. And then we've got David, who is a qualified nutritionist and is also talking about all his physical stuff and ways to actually minimize pain, keep ourselves in check. So between the three of us, I think we're covering, if you like, not quite perhaps like the mind, body and soul, but we're actually covering like the main aspects of health and well-being, and we're well placed to give advice on the challenges that we've all had as we've gone through this whole COVID era, which is almost certainly going to be continuing into some of next year. So we're going to start off with Helen, where each of the three of us is doing a bit of a wrap up, a bit of a summary. So each of us is going to talk for around about 7 minutes. So we're going to start off with Helen. So Helen, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I'm Helen Breward, and I'm going to talk to you again about just wrap up everything that I've been talking about and helping you with. So I thought a good idea would be to point out the tips that I've been giving you over the weeks. So we talked about lethargy, stress, boundaries and positivity. Now, the tips that I've been giving you have all been interwoven into each other. So by taking regular breaks, which is what I mentioned to you first in lethargy when we were talking about that, by taking those regular breaks, that also feeds in to those stressful times, because by taking those regular breaks, it helps you to ease that stress off and reduce that down. It also starts to help you with putting those boundaries in place, those work-life boundaries, especially when we're working from home. They can get very blurred. You know, before all of this hit, I know there were quite a lot of business people that I worked with at the time that found it very difficult to have that boundary between work and home life. And now that we are working from home, or a lot of us are working from home, it can be even harder. And also, you know, those taking regular breaks can be part of that positivity thing, giving yourself the right keratin effect. We talked about that one, about giving yourself the right motivation, the right reward in terms, really. You know, I can have this break and do this in my break once I've done this, which helps again with the stress, because you are chunking things down into small chunks and making what seems like a massive job into smaller little bits of jobs that actually you get done much quicker than you realize you were going to do, and it relieves a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. So one of the things that we talked about as well with stress was making sure that you had that time out for you, again, which feeds into what we were saying about regular breaks. Make sure that you take time out for yourself. It is not selfish. In fact, in a lot of ways, it is selfish not to be doing that, because by doing that, you allow yourself to have a break, calm down, which we all need to have those breaks, because we work much better once we've done that. So it's a very good strategy to be able to do that. Again, that feeds into the boundaries and it adds into the positivity, because you become more positive if you are focusing on yourself. So one of the things that I taught you along the line was a breathing technique. Now we can go over that very, very quickly right now, just to remind you if you either didn't see that one or you've forgotten what it is. And it's really, really simple. It's very good for stress, very good for any kind of emotion that you're not happy with. So you breathe in through your nose. You hold your breath while you count to 4. And then let it out very slowly. You really control it on that outward breath. You feel yourself coming right down. and you don't do that any more than 3 times one after the other, because you will get a little bit lightheaded. That is very good for relieving stress quite instantly and helping you to calm right down very quickly if you need to. You can do it anywhere, any situation, because you've got to breathe. And this is just very slightly different. Nobody notices what you're doing. Talking about boundaries, remember taking time off, which we've just talked about. Taking time off, taking time away, taking time for yourself also comes in with those boundaries. But the big thing that we discussed with that was physically taking off what it is that you're wearing that represents work for you. So for some people, it might be changing your clothes at the end of the day. It might be, I haven't got it on today, but I had a lanyard on at the time, taking your lanyard off and putting it down on the desk and walking away, so that you are signifying to your brain that it is the end of the working day. Getting changed out of those work clothes into home clothes and making that mental change from one persona to another. And all of that feeds into positivity. Now, the big thing we did with positivity was to, at the end of the day, to think about 3 things that have happened during the day that you are grateful for, that have been good. And now, I'm not saying that isn't good, because that is fantastic, but it can be small things like, I saw a bird in the garden, I had enough milk for a cup of tea. It can be tiny things too. It's just helping to train your brain to be more positive, to think more positively. And if you do that just as you nod off to sleep at night, you wake up feeling more positive in the morning. So that's me thinking, just wrapping up everything that I've certainly talked with you about. So just imagine how good you will feel when you've done all these things and you have what you really want to, and you feel positive and you're doing the things that you want to do. So use your imagination positively, not negatively. So that's me, and I'll be passing over back to Nick, who is going to talk about the things that he's been talking about.
I am indeed. Yes, thank you, Helen. So where I'm coming up, this is from my stress management diploma, and having done karate and been a black belt for over 20 years. So in terms of lethargy, I think where I'm coming from, it really underpins the work that that Helen and David are doing, because what I want to particularly focus on is self-esteem. If our self-esteem is a bit low because it's been battered, we've been put in this new situation of working from home. There's all sorts of chaos going on around us. We might know people who've been quite seriously ill with COVID, and we might even know people, I've learned in the last 2 weeks, someone I actually know who has died of it. So there's been all sorts of things, and they're battering our self-esteem all the time. And it's very easy for us to feel not worthy of actually looking after ourselves. So we then don't do the work that Helen and David have been talking about. So one simple remedy that I covered in the first webinar we do is actually, it's a very simple thing. It's deceptively simple, but it's to list your achievements. Because when we're actually aware of the things that we've achieved, it helps us. We're not saying I'm the best or I'm God's gift to everyone or anything like that. It's actually just this feeling of, yeah, I'm okay. I'm all right. I've achieved some things. I'm going to achieve other things in my life. And it helps to raise your self-esteem, your feeling of self-worth. And when I talked about this a few weeks ago, I've still got the list up here. And it's really weird because I said, I can read, I can write, I can ride a bike, I can swim, I can play the piano. And then it's really weird if you do this, because the 6th one that came up on my list was, I said, I'm good with a compass. All right. If you go walking with me in the Lake District or wherever it might be, there is a good chance that we will get lost, just to warn you. But I've never died yet. I've always got off the mountain safely. I do think that I am good with a compass, and how that came in as my sort of achievement number 5, I don't know. But I listed out about 40 things. I can ski, I've hitchhiked around Europe, I've taught complementary health therapy, I've also got my karate. But it's interesting, the last 2, it hadn't really occurred to me, but I was in my school chess team. And I don't think many people will have been in their school chess team. And the last thing I wrote down was I can speak some French. It's schoolboy French has been heavily corrupted, but I can get around. I don't know if people are perhaps being a bit polite or something like that, but I do speak a bit of French. So if you go through this exercise, it's a really interesting one, because you don't have to just sit there for like 10 minutes and write down everything, but put it somewhere where it's visible. And then as things come into your head, maybe you can ride a horse, maybe you've been given an award or a certificate, anything like that. And it just write it out. And it's just about, in tough times, you can just look at that and you can say, oh yeah, I'm really good at planning holidays. Maybe I once helped build someone a fence. I mean, it's just weird things, but it helps to keep your self-esteem up, and then you're more motivated to actually look after yourself. And when you're doing that, you're then well placed to look after other people. So that was on the lethargy side. On the stress side, I talked about focus. My karate instructor once saw the female kata champion, where you do a sequence of like 40, 50 moves. And she was in the warm-up room of a competition, and she was practicing a kata, this whole sequence of 40, 50 moves, but she was doing one technique. She was doing one technique and one technique and one technique and one technique. He saw her do one technique 50 times. And that's the focus and the mindset of a world champion. So, this thing about multitasking, it's a bit of a myth. So you can do lots of different things, but at any one time, you can only do one thing. So I did have a karate student who was very successful in karate. He was 18 years old and he was a second dan black belt. And he was struggling to have the focus to work on his studies to get the level of grades that he needed to get into police college. And I said, well, what do you do when you're practicing karate? And he said, well, around my room, I've got certificates. I've got a black belt, pinned above my door. So I see it every time I go out. I switch off everything and I just do my practicing. I said, well, that's how you need to revise. And that's what he did. And he passed his exams and he went to college. So it's this thing about focusing and removing distractions. The third thing that we talked about was boundaries. And I took a slightly different angle here because Bruce Lee, when he was doing a self-defense talk one day, with his foot, he drew a circle around him and he said, this is my circle of life. So it's almost like this is my boundary. Now, I take responsibility for what's in my boundary and what's outside it. The stuff outside it, politics, stuff like that, I don't know, you can list 100 things right outside it. I don't control them. This isn't about being a control freak. This is actually just saying, I recognize that these are things that I can't control, but actually I can control what's in my circle. So my boundary is in some ways quite big, because my circle in my world is me. And I'm taking responsibility for me and what I allow into that boundary. So that's a slightly different take on it, but something you might want to have a think about is, what can you take responsibility for? How you behave, what you think and feel, and equally, what are you stressing about? What's outside your boundary? And then the fourth thing I talked about was positivity. So when I went for my first dan black belt the first time, I didn't get it. I passed it when I retook it. You don't automatically get it. Some people have taken it 3, 4 or 5 times. When I went for my second dan black belt about 2.5 years later, I didn't get it. So as you are looking at me, you're looking at someone who has failed a black belt examination twice. I'm probably the first person that you've ever met who's failed a black belt exam twice. But I'm a 5th dan black belt. I'm still in the ring. I'm still doing stuff. I don't compete anymore. I didn't like competing. I didn't do a lot of it. I'm still teaching. I'm still training. I'm still practicing. But I failed twice. So did I fail? In my mind, that wasn't a failure. So the thing that I use for that is that if you take this, you might have heard the phrase that you only fail if you give up. And what I like to do is flip that and say, if you never give up, you'll never fail. So you can decide right now there's something in your life you want. And you can decide right now that you're not going to fail. Why? Because you're not going to give up. So you might not get it the first time or even the second time. You might not get it in the way in which you think you're going to get it. You might not actually get the thing you're aiming for, because you might find something that's even better for you. But if you decide right now that you're not going to give up, you will not fail. And the other thing, which again is relevant to my karate black belt exams, was when I went for my 3rd Dan black belt, I didn't want to not get it the first time. I'm not using the F word anymore, if you notice. So I visualized performing every technique properly. I visualized being awarded that 3rd Dan. I visualized how that made me feel. So visualize what it is you want to create. And there's a very, just to finish, there's a very subtle thing happening here, because when you visualize, you're only visualizing on the positive. So if you can only, if multitasking is a myth, and I think it is, and you're focusing on one thing, when you're visualizing, you're focusing on one thing, and that thing will be positive. So it does kind of come together. So that's it for lethargy, stress, boundaries, and positivity. That's me. So I'm going to hand over to David. David, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. And yeah, really interesting listening to that and just remembering what you both have been talking about previously and just cementing that in my head. I'm just going to maybe do the topics in slightly different order, but going to start off with lethargy, because that in itself is probably the biggest thing that I've found through talking to people that's affected people over this lockdown. It's a whole bore-out thing going on, and mentally it's not quite there. But how do we overcome that physically? How do we overcome lethargy physically? Well, it might be counterintuitive, and you might think, well, if I do exercise, I'm going to get tired. Well, that's not quite right, because if you do exercise, provided it's not stupidly strenuous stuff like chucking heavy weights around, then your brain will be energized. It'll become more energized. And there's a lovely study, scientific study out there, that shows that walking up and down stairs for 6 minutes has the same energizing effect on the brain as drinking an espresso, a strong espresso coffee. So a simple little tip for energizing and beating lethargy is move more. How do you do that? How do you move more? This is where I'm going to change the order, because we need to set some boundaries. We need to, and Helen was talking about taking breaks, and yeah, we need to take breaks. We need to set movement breaks. And what I do is I fix in my calendar weeks in advance when those breaks are going to happen during a day. So I know 2-3 weeks from now when I'm going to be taking those movement breaks, whether it's walking the dog or it's doing stuff in here or whatever. Those are already in my calendar, and those are non-negotiable. So be strict with that. Set the breaks that Helen was talking about, set the breaks, movement breaks, the exercise breaks in your calendar, and make them non-negotiable. And also, while we're talking about that, putting stuff in your calendar, I also put my lunch breaks in the calendar. And again, those are non-negotiable, because it's so easy for you sit there working away either on Zoom meetings or other work, and it just bleeds and bleeds and bleeds, and time just disappears. And then you get to 3 o'clock and I'm so hungry, I haven't eaten. And your brain's crying out for food. Your body's crying out for movement. And by taking those breaks, you'll find that you're suddenly much more productive, and you're not as lethargic, you're not as tired feeling. And also probably not as stressed, because by moving, you're flooding your body with endorphins. Now, endorphins are very naturally produced within the body, and they're very similar to opioid drugs that you can buy or be prescribed. But the endorphins act as natural pain relievers and stress relievers that the body produces, and it produces them by moving, and also by, come on, smile, you're allowed to. Even if you don't want to smile, but you force a smile, the body will produce endorphins. How cool is that? That's awesome. But also maybe eating dark chocolate shown to or spicy food, or even just enjoying your favorite dish. And there are other things that can raise your endorphin levels, but they're too rude for a professional setting, so I'm not going to go there, but I'll make you smile hopefully by talking about that. But there are other forms of exercise that you can do that are really simple, and one of them is walking. I'll always espouse walking, because if you're going out walking, science has shown that if you're in the fresh air, daylight, and surrounded by green, then your stress levels come down. Greenery, plants, have a magical effect on the body. But if you're doing physical exercise whilst in fresh air and daylight surrounded by green, your stress levels come down. But not only that, if you can't get outside, but you're doing some exercise, moving around, your heart rate increases, which then also draws more oxygen into the body. And because you've got more oxygen in the body, body's tension, muscular tension reduces, which in turn releases stress. But also, if you do exercise and you're outside, how many times have you been outside and maybe gardening in the summer when it's warm, and you've come and I'm really tired, I'm sleepy, and you sleep much better after doing some physical exercise outside. So that in itself reduces long-term stress, chronic stress, because cortisol levels are reduced by getting decent sleep. So there you go. Summing up, you don't need to be a fitness fanatic to do any of that, as hopefully you've discovered through what I've been saying. You do what you can, when you can, scheduling those breaks. Laugh a lot, smile a lot, walk a lot. Even if you can't get outside, go and look out a window and look at some greenery, and hopefully you'll feel better. That's it from me. Back to Nick for his final little piece.
Thank you, David. So hopefully you see how between the three of us, we're addressing, if you like, the mental, the emotional and the physical challenges that we've all been facing over the last, what is now, blimey, since March is, as I speak, it is literally 8 months and 2 days. So I'd just like to finish off by sharing a couple of screens. So first of all, we are Connect, and we have some online programs, which means that employees learn at their own convenience. That's our bronze package. We have lots of programs, including physical exercise programs. We can do one-to-one and various consultations via Skype. So whatever it is that your company requires, we can help you with whatever it is you need. So there's my contact details on there, unless you know Helen or David, in which case please contact them. But you can get hold of me, Nick at nickforgham.com, or 0777 625 8366. So thank you for coming. Hope you found it worthwhile, and we'll be restarting these in January. So please make a note or contact us, and we'll put you on the list for that. So thanks a lot, and remember, look after yourself and stay safe. Cheers for now. Bye.
Bye now.